July 31st, 2016. A simple farming game quietly launched online, offering players the chance to raise virtual animals, tend crops, and make real-world profits. Harmless fun, right? Little did anyone know, this game, Ciftlik Bank, would become the front for one of the biggest financial scandals in gaming history. By the time it came crashing down, over $80 million had been funneled away from more than 130,000 unsuspecting players, many of whom were left devastated, their life savings wiped out. The mastermind behind it all promised a dream. Invest your hard-earned money into a virtual farm that would supposedly fund real-world agricultural projects. The returns? They seemed too good to be true, and that's because they were. As the player base grew, so did the pot of money. Early investors saw returns, but they weren't coming from real profits. They were just other players' cash. By the time the scheme began to unravel, the man behind the curtain vanished, taking the fortunes of thousands with him. But how did it all happen? How could something so simple, a farming game, spiral into a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme that left so many players empty-handed? To find out how this con artist ate his hand and fled the scene, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. We've got all the jaw-dropping details coming up, and you won't want to miss a moment of this wild story. Mehmet Aydin, the man behind Ciftlik Bank, had humble beginnings before he became infamous for one of the largest financial frauds. Born in 1991 in Bursa, Turkey, Aydin grew up in a middle-class family with a relatively uneventful childhood. As a teenager, Aydin was described as introverted, with a deep interest in technology, particularly in online gaming. He was often drawn to the world of computers and digital platforms, where he explored various online communities. He wasn't someone who stood out academically, nor was he ever noted for being ambitious or business-minded during his youth. Instead, he seemed like an ordinary kid, just someone fascinated by the growing internet culture. It wasn't until Aydin entered his early 20s that he began showing signs of entrepreneurial curiosity. The combination of his knowledge of the digital world and his growing ambition set the stage for something larger. His knack for understanding online trends, combined with the booming world of virtual games, gave him the idea of creating an interactive platform that would merge gaming with real-world profits. By the time Aydin was in his mid-20s, he had begun to dabble in small online ventures, but none made much of a splash. His early endeavors were marked by trial and error, but he was constantly learning about the financial potential of online ecosystems, particularly the allure of quick returns and the rising trend of online investment platforms. He realized that by promising players the chance to invest in virtual economies, something many people were already familiar with from games like Farmville, he could capitalize on both the gaming and financial markets. Thus, the idea of creating a farming simulation game, but with real money stakes, began to take shape in his mind. Aydin wasn't just looking to create another game, he wanted to build an empire. To do this, he leveraged his limited experience in the tech world and began networking with developers and marketing experts who could help turn his vision into reality. His charm and persuasiveness were key to gaining the trust of those around him. Even in the early days of his business ventures, Aydin knew how to sell a dream. Despite his seemingly ordinary background, Aydin's understanding of people's growing interest in both online gaming and quick investment opportunities paved the way for the scheme that would soon follow. His ability to tap into the psychology of investors and gamers alike helped him build the foundation for what would become Ciftlik Bank. After Mehmet Aydin's experimentation with smaller online ventures, the concept for Ciftlik Bank began to form. By 2016, Aydin had refined his idea into a business plan. He envisioned an online game that wasn't just a place to escape reality, but a platform where players could invest real money under the guise of creating something tangible. A virtual farm that would finance real agricultural projects. Inspired by games like Farmville, where players manage virtual farms for fun, Ciftlik Bank took this concept to a whole new level. Players could buy virtual animals, crops, and equipment to grow their digital farms. But unlike in other games, these investments promised real financial returns. Players were told their money would go toward building an actual farming empire in Turkey, a project that would generate profits they could share in. It was a brilliantly simple concept that tapped into people's love for simulation games and their desire for financial gain. Aydin was a master at selling this dream. He knew how to appeal to people's hopes and ambitions, and with the promise of real earnings, Ciftlik Bank quickly gained traction. He marketed it as a way for ordinary people to invest in something real, something they could be proud of. The game's structure was designed to create trust. Players saw their virtual farms growing, their earnings increasing, and they believed that their investments were fueling a legitimate business. By 2017, Ciftlik Bank was booming. Word spread like wildfire, and soon, tens of thousands of players had joined the game, investing their money in what they believed was a sure path to easy profits. Aiden promised that the game's earnings were being funneled into actual agricultural projects, including a massive dairy farm that he claimed would house 35,000 cows. The images of shiny barns and sprawling green fields filled promotional materials, giving the illusion that something grand was being built behind the scenes. What really fueled the game's rise was its early payouts. In a classic Ponzi scheme fashion, Ciftlik Bank paid early investors with the money coming in from new participants. This kept players hooked. They saw returns on their investments and reinvested their earnings, bringing in more people through word of mouth. Aiden's charm and the game's seemingly foolproof system created an aura of legitimacy. Thousands of people, from farmers to professionals, poured their savings into the game, convinced that they were part of a revolutionary business model. At its peak, Ciftlik Bank had attracted over 130,000 players and raised more than $130 million. Aiden became somewhat of a celebrity. He flaunted his success with extravagant purchases, luxury cars, expensive clothes, and lavish vacations, only adding to the illusion that his ventures were legitimate. His growing empire seemed unstoppable, with plans to expand into other industries, including cryptocurrency. But behind the scenes, cracks were starting to appear. The dairy farms and agricultural projects Aiden had promised never materialized. Investigators began to notice discrepancies in the financial records, and players who had reinvested their returns began to notice delays in payments. By late 2017, rumors of fraud started circulating. Aiden, sensing the noose tightening, began moving his assets abroad and distancing himself from the business. In early 2018, the Turkish government launched an official investigation into Ciftlik Bank. It quickly became apparent that the game was a Ponzi scheme, and that the real-world farms Aiden had promised to build were a complete fabrication. Turkish authorities moved to freeze the assets of the companies linked to Ciftlik Bank, but by then, Aiden had already fled the country, taking millions with him. His escape only added to the drama of the unfolding scandal. Aiden first fled to northern Cyprus, a territory that does not have an extradition agreement with Turkey, before making his way to Uruguay, where he hid for several years. During this time, Turkish media were filled with stories of the devastated players who had lost their life savings. The game that had once promised financial freedom had left thousands in financial ruin. Some players had invested everything they had, convinced by Aiden's charm and the game's early success. For the next few years, Aiden became one of Turkey's most wanted fugitives. His name remained in the headlines, with reports of sightings in various countries, but authorities struggled to track him down. Meanwhile, in Turkey, the legal proceedings against Ciftlik Bank continued. Thousands of victims filed lawsuits, and Aiden's associates were arrested, though none could offer clues to his whereabouts. Then, in a surprising twist, Aiden resurfaced in 2021. After years on the run, he released a video in which he announced his intention to surrender. In the video, Aiden claimed that he had never intended to defraud anyone, and that he would clear his name. Shortly after, he turned himself in to the Turkish consulate in São Paulo, Brazil. His surrender was met with shock and relief by those who had been chasing him for years. Back in Turkey, Aiden faced multiple charges of fraud, with prosecutors seeking sentences that could amount to thousands of years in prison. His trial became a media spectacle, with every detail of his life and business being scrutinized. Despite his claims of innocence, the evidence against him was overwhelming. The farms he had promised were never built, and much of the money had been funneled into offshore accounts or spent on his luxurious lifestyle. Mehmet Aydin, the mastermind behind Ciftlik Bank, has lost nearly everything. Once flaunting a lavish lifestyle of luxury cars, expensive properties, and international travel, his empire came crashing down when his Ponzi scheme was exposed. His assets were frozen, and the Turkish government seized millions in ill-gotten funds. The farms and agricultural projects he promised investors never existed, and now the glamorous image he had built is gone. What remains for Aiden is a future filled with legal battles and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison. Turkish prosecutors have sought 89,000 years in prison for his crimes. This sentence is based on charges of aggravated fraud and money laundering, with thousands of victims demanding justice. He may have managed to escape for a while, but now, Aiden is facing a reality much harsher than any virtual farm could prepare him for. Ciftlik Bank started as a virtual farming game, where players could invest real money in digital animals, crops, and equipment, with the promise that these investments would fund real-world agricultural projects. Players were told their money would help build farms that would produce profits they could share in, turning a simple game into a high-stakes investment platform. For a while, it seemed like a win-win. Players watched their farms grow, received returns, and more people flocked to join. But the game's success was all smoke and mirrors. As new players joined, Their investments were funneled to pay off earlier participants. Classic Ponzi scheme tactics. There were no real farms, no dairy empire, just virtual promises that unraveled when the funds dried up. By the time Turkish authorities caught on, the damage was done and thousands of players had lost their money. What began as a fun online experience turned into financial devastation. The rise of Ciftlik Bank was fast and flashy, but its fall was swift and harsh, leaving a trail of broken promises and stolen fortunes.